the voice of the youth to such a fora. And I represent the Geneva hub of the Global Shippers community. And just in one sentence, we have conducted a survey a few months ago across the youth. And Fabrizio mentioned a contradiction, and something that emerged out of this survey that we did is that young people are optimistic very often when it comes to how they can shape their direct environment. But they are less optimistic, and quite far less optimistic, when it comes to shaping global structure and global processes. And you can argue, is it a contradiction or is it an opportunity? And I think here we are really trying to focus this conversation about this being a real opportunity, because it is about the local impact that we can have. And this is the value that we will discuss here as a Global Shippers community.
And what's valid in Geneva is valid in Africa, in Morocco.
Yes, exactly. So I said that I think the world would be better, but that comes with a condition. If we learn how to be emotionally healthy. I imagine that there will be a lot of disasters, climate change, cybersecurity, inequality. But I think if we learn how to take care of our inner selves, we will know how to deal with it better and heal together through it.
I think generally as well, in order for something to change, you need to be optimistic. You need to believe that something can change. And if we know one thing, the world is always changing. So I guess it's a question of what direction does it go. And as Fatima said, I feel like if we all are able to have that self-awareness and that connection to our source, the likelihood of it being a positive change is greater, and I feel that is happening with the youth today.
So,
This is you from the US.
just like the US. I would love to give the pageant answer of like, oh, we're gonna have world peace in 25 years. That'd be nice. My fear right now is, and why I said I think it's gonna be worse, is that yes, we are really trying to remain optimistic, and yet how we are looking at issues and tackling them is very separate and we're very segmented. And as I said earlier, we have a breaking down of democracy in several places, and this is all while the global economy is doing fairly well, right? And as we look on the outlook, we see we've got rising debt. How are we going to be nimble enough in the next 5 to 10 years, as the economic signals say, that we might not be doing so well? And so my fear is, when the economy doesn't do well, people retreat further into their fears, into this scarcity mindset. And so we have more of a lack of cooperation for us to actually move forward in these ways that we've discussed here, of being so great here at Davos.
I think there's one clear view from all of you. The world can be better, but it depends on us.
Exactly.
And there is a sentence by Jean Monnet, one of the fathers of the European Union, when he was asked if he was optimistic or pessimistic, he said, I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, I'm determined. And I think what we are all is determined to have a better world. And I mean, to have a better world, some things need to change. What are, in your opinion, the main changes we need in the next 25 years? Can we start by you?
You can start with me. I'll take it. One of the big changes that I think that we need to make to ensure that we have inclusive economic prosperity with the fourth industrial revolution in the next 25 years is that we are not discussing issues in silos or solutions in silos, but they were actually working together. One of the examples I have here at Davos is that the topic was about climate change overall. There should have been more interconnected work around what does climate change mean for marginalized communities in terms of equity and equality? What does climate change mean in terms of mental health? And so my fear is that we're operating in silos with solutions because we're operating from this sense of there's just not enough at this moment.
For me, I think there's a culture of shame that we live in, and my cause is mental health. And I think this is a threat that's invisible because a lot of people can seem happy and cheerful, but they are struggling with depression, anxiety, sometimes more serious mental illnesses. And I think we need to learn how to get close and pay attention to those people and have empathy for them. And I think once, especially the world's leaders and the leaders of companies, they pay attention to that and give people a safe space, because I think that doesn't exist today. Give people a safe space to say, I'm not doing well. And I want the world's leaders to say, I'm not doing well, and sharing their personal stories. I think once that changes, the whole world is going to change.
So I think obviously there needs to be a a system-based change. And I think that starts at the root of it, shifting from an egocentric based leadership to ecocentric, where we're getting rid of hierarchies across our systems, and we're creating equity and equality throughout. As one of my fellow shapers also said, so once you have that, I think then you can walk hand in hand with nature. As Brittany mentioned to me earlier today, I thought that was a beautiful phrase and something that when I think about the future, I would love to walk hand in. I would love society to walk hand in hand in nature, with nature, as ultimately it is the foundation for our society to be prosperous, for our economy to be prosperous. And so if we can create a vision or work towards that, I think it'll be better for everyone.
One of the key things that I think we need to be doing is really to preserve some of the key values that brought our society all together. This is something you mentioned in your speech yesterday. And when we look at the effect of climate change, the effect of new technologies, they are disruptive, or they can be disruptive on some of the key values that brings us together. And I just would like to focus on one in particular. It's the ability to find a shared understanding of what the problems are, and the ability to compromise. And if I can just speak out of my experience as a global shaper, the global shaper has been life-changing for me because it brought me to meet people from different backgrounds, from different industries, from different faiths. And having to work together on common issues that we face really brought me a lot of hope and really allowed me to find that common purpose that we desperately need as a society. So we need to preserve the value of having a shared and a common objective.
I think this discussion was very rich because you focused on one hand, inclusivity.
Yes.
To have everybody on board, to have everybody's problems begin taking care, and to create conditions for people to fully participate. And you mentioned the mental health, that is probably one of the biggest tragedies of our time. You meant sustainability, nature. I mean, at the same time, this idea of values, it is such an important idea. And the value that you mentioned, people coming together. We cannot do this against each other. The challenges are so big that we really need to unite. So I think your contributions are very well taken. Thank you very much for that. But the problem is that, okay, these are the changes we want, but there are obstacles. And we are facing obstacles all days. What are the main obstacles and challenges you see in the world in the next 25 years that could make things go wrong?
Well, if I can just speak out of...
But please, you can interrupt.
Of course, yeah. Let's try to contradict each other, okay? I think that here we have a diverse audience, and I love to remember that here in the room we have some friends, shapers, who last week were fighting against the firebush in Australia, some others who are emerging from refugee camps. We have some others who are from Venezuela. And the key concern I have is not just how can the multilateral find ideas and brainstorm, but how can we ensure that whenever they go home, they can actually actionate some key solutions. And here I'm actually full of hope, because I really feel that the focus should not necessarily be that much on the overall broader system, but how can the space of influence that key actors such as yourself and a few others can in really pushing for local initiatives, really pushing for people to realize that they have a sphere of influence, and the sphere of influence doesn't have to be big. It's just about believing that there is something that can be done, and really encouraging people to step up and take their own responsibility to create the change that they want to see.
But sometimes we push the wall and the wall doesn't move.
Right.
What are the walls that do not move, in your opinion?
In my opinion, one of the moves that doesn't work is maybe the expectation that other people need to take the space that we want to see. We wait for others to act instead of really saying, okay, I'm going to take action and really try to see and act and be the change I want to see around me.
Yeah,
Do you agree?
Well, for me, I think an obstacle is this firefighting mode that we feel like we're in today, with climate activism, with a lot of the causes that we work on. I feel like, we're sometimes too focused on projects and initiatives, and we kind of lose sight of the big picture. And I think just paying attention, zooming out, paying attention, awareness, and as Robin beautifully said, quoting Brittany, walking hand in hand with nature and walking hand in hand with our inner nature. I think we have a blockage, a wall between us and nature and between us and our inner nature. And it's hard. It's hard to break that wall, but we need to be vulnerable enough and brave enough to break that wall, I think, once we do that.
Can you elaborate on this wall between us and our inner nature?
Well, I mean, it's if I ask you how are you feeling right now, or we go into the details of it, it's not really comfortable, right? And I think for the world's leaders as well, it's much easier to hide behind this armor of we are thinking about it rationally, and we have a project, and so on and so forth. But we're human beings at the end of the day. If we don't take care of our emotions and talk about it, we feel that there is this wall between the leaders as well and us. And I think this common humanity, once we work on it, we suffer together and we'll heal together, I think.
And it shows up, right? It's not something that can be hidden for very long. It shows up in your work. It shows up in your everyday interaction with anybody. And if you're really out there to develop collaborations and partnerships with pure intent, the success of that solution is only going to be as sound and as impactful as how kind of centered and stable you are internally. And I think that goes for any leader or anyone for that matter.
I'm like in between you two now on this one. When you talk about those internal changes and connecting it to the local community, I think one of the blockages that we're seeing is that we're at a point where we need to see real systemic change happening. And we've got some failures within the international community in terms of communication, in terms of being courageous enough to call each other out on the changes that we need to make. And so I think starting at the local level to be the catalyst for the systemic changes that we want to see, which is really kind of the internal, the heart of humanity, is how we operating in each of ourselves and each of our communities.
And may I ask an indiscreet question to all of you? Okay, but we deal in a context in which we have political establishments and we have different sources of power and we have international organizations. How do you see them? Do you see them as an obstacle or as an instrument? Or to what extent do you see both?
I think it's an accelerator. I think the big organizations such as the UN can really be playing a role in accelerating all of those initiatives that we see and giving them the legitimacy very often that they need. And the showcase, the network, and enabling to bring these initiatives up to scale in essence.
Maybe to add on that, I do see a barrier as well, though, because of the increased kind of nationalism that we're seeing in the world and the division that's being caused over humanity, right? We're seeing each other as, we see more differences between each other than we do commonality. And I think that is a barrier and a challenge. But I do believe, like Yannick said, these organizations that bring people together to have discussions, I think is, a huge player in that, in helping remove some of those barriers. But I still think that is something that we're challenged with.
Arlene, what do you
No, don't put it on me yet. I'm still thinking.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think global collaboration can be an enabler, but I think if we remember to pay attention to the differences, as you said, and especially, low and middle income countries, recognizing that some populations have different needs, thinking about diversity and inclusion, because I think that the mistake is probably just having this one blueprint that we want to apply to everyone, and not, again, giving that safe space for everyone to say, no, this doesn't work for me, I need this.
Maybe on that, so collaboration creates one common goal or objective that you want to work towards. But everyone in that room plays a different part to their capacity and to their strength. And so I think if we can approach challenges such as, the loss of nature and biodiversity and climate change with that approach where we have this common goal, and whoever is able to contribute to that based on their means, that's how you're going to move things forward.
And in a sense, this is where the platform economy emerges as well, because as a young generation, I think we tend to be much more institutionally agnostics, in a sense that it's not about which organization or institution does what, but what is the one issue that we address all together, and how do we ensure that all of the effort are really channeled towards those objectives.
See, I disagree with that one. I don't think that we should be looking at it that way. I think that we need to be looking at all the issues that are on the table, and we need to be just looking at solutions because they're all interconnected, right? And so we're leaving people behind when we're only looking at one issue. We're saying, oh, we focus on this, and there's other things that are burning, right? But really, it's this fire is actually causing this fire over here in that way. In terms of the international system now, I think that there's a lack of courage and a lack of holding each other accountable within the system, right? So I think part of what the youth, not disbelief, but part of our lack of belief in how the system currently works is that we're having these conversations, but in terms of action and actually holding people accountable and countries accountable and systems accountable, I don't know if we're doing that.
May I ask one question more specific that follows up on this last part? I mean, what role do you see to the UN? And how would you like to see the UN changing for that role to be possible? And be blunt, no? If you think that the one doesn't serve any purpose, say it. If you see that we are doing wrong, I mean, we are here to listen, as I said. We want to change and to improve and to do better. But we need to listen to the wishes and anxieties and hopes of the people. So what do you want of the UN for the next 25 years?
Building on your point, accountability and transparency, and I don't know, maybe it is a UN issue, but maybe other players and partners need to come in on that. But I forget who mentioned it, but there are a lot of promises that are made, there are a lot of commitments that are made, there are a lot of goals that are created from these international organizations through the power of collaboration and partnership. But then the accountability and the execution of it isn't there, and that's where it falls short. And so who has the power, who has the ability to create the transparency and the accountability in this system that's going to help us reach the targets that we need to reach? I think that for me is like a huge question, and
I think it's about changing how you do what you do, not necessarily changing what you do. Yesterday I was on a panel with the director of UNICEF, for example, and she's a very, empathic lady, and I hope the world has, more female leaders because we just naturally are empathic. We can debate that, but I think, again, how like the underlying approach to tackling problems. So you can keep doing the same, but from as I said, turning inside and being more aware and paying more attention. I wonder whether UN settings, because I'm not sure, but the way I imagine it's very formal, very institutionalized. So maybe making that more feminine, if I can say that, and just more empathic. I don't know, starting UN meetings with 1 minute mindfulness. Maybe I'm pushing the border too far here, but really paying attention, and I think that kind of changes the culture. And I think when the culture changes, you can reach your goals in a better way without having to come up with a complex solution. I think the answers are simple. I'm not sure whether that makes sense. Maybe I went too philosophical.
No.
People don't really care about how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, exactly.
And at the end of the day, it's very much about ensuring that the effects of institutions are being felt with a tangible effect by everyone. And this is actually the issue that most big organizations are facing, the EU as well. And how do we really manage to translate policies, big discussions into something that can be felt by the people? And this is a bigger challenge. I mean, and I'm not saying that we have a lot of solutions here, but one idea, especially looking at the youth, we know that the youth needs to be increasingly looked at as a key stakeholder and to be integrated in decision-making processes. And we've seen what the private sector has started to be doing with shadow executive committees, when the evening before a board meeting, they will invite 25 young people to brainstorm about what the executive committee is going to discuss the day after and bring that feedback back to the executive afterwards. The question is, could we do the same with the Security Council? Or could we do the same with some of those big framework and bringing the voice of the young people from different nations and saying, on that issue, this is what the youth is saying. That will be one way to bring the stakeholders at the table and, in a sense, to try to come up with ideas on how to create effects that they can definitely feel.
Yeah, I like that point about the Security Council, because from your remarks yesterday, I think my top one is what I would like from the UN is to remain courageous in the words that you say. And you said it yesterday about the inability of the Security Council to actually make any agreements. The courage to continue to uphold the world and all of our political institutions to the values that we agreed to for all of our humanity. And then my big so I got three I would like. My second one that would be in terms of the SDGs, and as we move forward to really achieving those, is that we actually focus on the interconnectedness of all of those, because I think we're going to get the best solutions there. And my third one is to put the weight of the UN behind actual local initiatives that are happening at a grassroots level on the ground, because those are the best responses and the best pulses to what is happening in different communities around the world. And if the UN can put its weight behind those are the ones that can lead us to a larger systemic change, while the larger international community remains a bit pessimistic and kind of stuck in some dinosaur ways.
I think there are a number of very rich ideas. First, transparency and accountability, which is essential for the credibility of any organization. I mean, the way both of you have put the question of caring and listening, and not only appearing in the kind of imperial approach to tell everybody what to do, but on the contrary, having the humility to understand, to listen, to care, and to show that we are doing what we are doing because of the people we care for, not because of we believe we are very important or whatever. And your clear approach that we need values. And then we need to make sure that we have a comprehensive approach of what we do in the Sustainable Development Goals and in other aspects, and we are able to have it in a very comprehensive way. I think these are very rich contributions. How much time do we have to generalize the discussion?
We have about another 10-15 minutes.
10-15, because now I wanted to ask the friends that are around about these issues that we have been discussing to give your contribution. Don't ask questions. Just tell us what you want to tell, because there's nobody here to answer. No, you to say what you want to say.
So I'm caught a bit off guard because I actually had a question, primarily because the opportunity of having the UN Secretary General in the same room with us, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. I think the biggest concern is Dag Hammarskjöld, the first UN Secretary General, said that the purpose of UN is not to make the world a heaven, but to prevent it from becoming hell. However, and that manages the expectations, but it's also important to not lose sight in the context in which the League of Nations came in the first place, and the context in which the United Nations came in afterwards. And the commonality in both those events was the rise of right-wing nationalism across the globe. And unfortunately, we are now seeing the rise in right-wing nationalism from Oceania to the Americas. And the issues of cybersecurity and climate change, even if a country takes deep structural reforms, which are very difficult on the consumers, on the citizens, their efforts might not be enough because others might not be doing enough to counter those challenges. I really wanted to know, the steps that the UN could take and how could the youth basically help the UN implement those ideas, because I think these exchange programs are so good, because when we meet people from across the globe, from Japan to US to Latin America to Asia, we realize Africa, Europe, we realize we are literally all the same, who all want the same thing. And I think these exchanges are so important. Every time a Pakistani meets an Indian, you realize we are literally the same. And it's just the politics that divides us. And we really want these exchange programs to be communalized, and the UN basically, funding them and ensuring that countries actually undertake these programs. Thank you.
That is really good.
Thank you. My worry is about, we are already in the fourth industrial revolution, and we're seeing that organizations and institutions are not going to survive unless they realize that we are here, and that technology, we need to rule our technology rather than let it rule us. And so what I wonder is how the UN is going to become an organization that is more agile rather than bureaucratic, because we need more of that. The world, you're asking 10 years from now, 50 years from now, we can't know what that is going to look like, not even in months. I mean, the context might change pretty quickly, and we need to find systems that will allow us to be more crowdsourced and democratized. So I think we should look more into the technologies that are at hand right now and implement them into a lot of the processes.
So I'm from Japan, and we have a serious problem called aging society, and that really bugs me. And then the problem is there's a severe gap between generations, even within Japan. And if you talk about the global gap between sorry, let me rephrase. So what I think is important is I really like the discussion on optimism at the beginning. And I grew up being told that my generation is called a lost generation in Japan. The entire last 3 decades in Japan was said to be economic stagnation, and we could not grow as much as the world has been growing. And that really I lost my confidence out of it. However, recently I feel optimistic by being surrounded by all the global shapers here. What I learned is problems is a source of improvement for the future. And there are a lot of grassroots actors like us, all the global shapers and all the civil society. And what is important for the UN, I think, is to catch up all those great things that are done in each country, in each community, and then spread all the best practices to different communities that cannot have been, connected without. And yeah, I think all the leaders in the current society, it is really important to go beyond the sovereignty. I think that will be a huge challenge for the UN. To bridge between the civil society and the country as a government. Thank you.
Thank you. Laís from Brazil. My biggest concern here is actually on terms of equality and representation. We still have huge examples of not being well represented, even in terms of youth, but also in terms of gender, race. The UN itself is a great example because we never had, for example, a general secretary woman. So I think
that's a problem I cannot solve.
Yeah, I know. I know. I just think it's very fair to point it out because 75 years of the organization, and it's time to have that kind of representation, and it happens